Hey guys, Modsy here, and today we're going to finally jump in and take a look at all of the benchmark results for my Windows 98 Retro PC. This video was actually scheduled to go up and was already uploaded and sitting on YouTube about a week and a half ago. But then a really interesting video came out from Phil from Phil's Computer Lab regarding the impact that drivers have on early GeForce cards and even the TNT cards. And well, I happened to be comparing the TNT2 up against the Voodoo 3 that I was using in this system, and I wasn't happy with the level of performance that the TNT2 was having, and I kind of thought, well, I was actually using one of the drivers that he showed in his benchmarks had a huge impact on performance for that card. So I went back to the drawing board, chucked the TNT2 back into the system, and loaded a couple of different driver versions that he used in his testing, and well, yeah, the TNT2 gained about 20 to 25 FPS just by changing drivers. I was using some in the, I think it was like the 40 range, like 41 point something or other for the TNT2, and it was really bad, and I thought that was kind of what it was supposed to be like, because I wasn't used to just dealing with a driver discrepancy in performance to the magnitude that he illustrated can actually happen in his video. So I loaded up, I think it was the 9 point something or other, I can't remember, it was about a week ago when I did the retesting, and yeah, lo and behold, the TNT2 did actually gain anywhere from between like 5 to up to 20 FPS in some games. So I redid the results, redid all the benchmarks, and well, let's get stuck in and see what we've got. Now, the first result I wanted to get into with you guys is Need for Speed High Stakes. This is one of the main games that I wanted to build this system based around to be able to handle. So this is kind of like the worst case scenario performance-wise, as in the most, I guess, demanding game that I wanted this system to be able to run at a specific targeted frame rate, and that was between sort of the 50 to 60 FPS range, because that's sort of where you get the smoothest handling and the smoothest gameplay for these early Need for Speed games, is around that frame rate. And as you can definitely see here, the TNT2 really just didn't cut it. Even at both resolutions here, we've got 800 by 600 and 1024 by 768. And yeah, the TNT2 just really doesn't handle it. It's most noticeable at the start of every race, where you're like the car in last place, and all the AI cars are in front of you, and it like does like the camera pan around before you start the race. With the TNT2, the game chugs at something between like 15 and 20 FPS until the game starts, and then you're sitting at between 20 to 25 FPS until you manage to get up to first place, where then the game will finally render it somewhere between like 25 and 30 FPS when there's not as much AI going on. Now, I originally thought this was going to be a CPU bottleneck, but when I put the Voodoo 3 in there, it was like night and day difference. That Voodoo 3 just really took off, and I was honestly shocked at just how well it performed, even at the 1024 by 768 resolution. The game also just looked so much nicer. Now, I'm playing this on a monitor where that resolution, 1024 by 768, is the native resolution, so you have all the pixels lined up nicely, and there's just a huge difference even in image quality between the Voodoo 3 and the TNT2, where you can tell that this game was built for the Voodoo hardware. Things like textures on cars matched up with the geometry better, more accurately. There was no issues with Z-buffer clipping through, with textures clipping through the models of cars and through trees and all that kind of weird stuff that was very present in the TNT2. Now, I also decided to chuck in software mode and the SIS chipset, which is the onboard chipset as well. And well, that thing was just horrendous. So you're going to see that in some of the other graphs here as well, but yeah, it's just really not suited for any kind of 3D work at all. I think there's only 1 or 2 games in this that it's actually going to be able to handle, but yeah. Now, for the fun of it, I decided to chuck in software mode, because I know a lot of people back in the early Need for Speed days, that's how they experienced Need for Speed, in software mode. So this is 1024 by 768 in software mode with the 533 MHz Intel Celeron, which is the one based on the Pentium 2 architecture. And as you can see, that pretty much matches the same performance that the TNT2 did at that same resolution running Direct 3D. So it's quite telling here that M64 model of TNT2, 16 meg of VRAM, I know you can get 32 meg versions as well, but I don't think that's really going to matter. The TNT2 here is just not powerful enough to actually withstand the huge Goliath that is the Voodoo 3 here. It's a clear winner. And one of the other good benchmarking tools for a late 90s gaming PC is running the Crusher and the Massive One Quake 2 benchmarks, because they very heavily rely on good CPU and RAM performance, as well as a good video card as well. Now, as you can see here, even with the huge amount of horsepower that the Voodoo 3 has, it's very much getting bottlenecked by the CPU here. It doesn't matter which resolution, you can tell that it was CPU bound, because at both resolutions you pretty much got almost identical frame rate as well. But you can tell with all the AI jumping around that it was definitely down to the CPU being the limiting factor here for both of these tests. And then we come along to Half-Life 1, and here you can see the results aren't very good. I was honestly expecting, given the performance of Need for Speed High Stakes, that Half-Life 1, being a very nice and smooth OpenGL game running really nicely on glide drivers and seeing results of what other people are having with the Voodoo 3, that this game would run really nicely. However, I was finding that the system was chugging so much whenever there was a lot going on screen in this game. I tested in both Counter-Strike, an early version 1.0 Counter-Strike, 1.5 Counter-Strike, an early version of Half-Life, so like the original version of Half-Life, as well as the newer, I guess the version running the latest patch, and this was kind of the best result from that whole mixture of testing that I did, just running Half-Life 1 itself. And it seems to be definitely down to the amount of AI that's going on screen, because when you get to a zone that doesn't have very much AI, or maybe only one or two enemies, the frame rate definitely does go up to like 60 to 70, really nice. But as soon as you have like a level that has a few soldiers on it, a little bit of action going on, the frame rate just tanks really quickly down to sort of the 20s to 30s. The Voodoo 3 is able to pull through on most places, but there are a couple of levels that I found that were somewhere between like 20 and 25 FPS at the higher resolution. And as you can see, that SIS chipset is pretty laughable down there in last place. And here we have Age of Empires 2. Now, I picked this RTS over something like Diablo 2 or something like StarCraft, for example, because this game actually has quite a bit of reliance on the CPU for a lot of the AI interactions, and when you have a lot of stuff going on with big battles and fights, this is one of the games that I remember chugging quite a bit on some of the older systems back in the day, so that's why I picked this one, and it seems to be quite telling actually, but I must say that this is just one of those games where you can actually run it on the TNT2 perfectly fine, because, well, quite simply, the game doesn't need to run at 60 FPS for you to even experience this game at its full potential. So the TNT2 definitely holds its own in this game, but the Voodoo 3 just offers that little bit of an extra bump up to make things just that slightly bit smoother. I know some people still can notice it, to the eye, 30 FPS is not quite as smooth, especially if it dips below 30 FPS sometimes. So the Voodoo 3 is definitely that nice buffer where you don't quite get those moments where it goes below 30. It sort of hovers between that 30 minimum, but averages definitely over 40, which is very nice. Now, this benchmark graph here is designed to illustrate just how much raw performance the Voodoo 3 2000 PCI card actually has. So this card isn't the most highest end model of the Voodoo 3s, it's around about 70% of the fastest version you can get, especially when you make sure it's got active cooling and all the clocks are running accurately, etc. But I know one of the most popular sort of builds for people to do is something like a 1 gig Pentium 3, 1.4 gig Pentium 3, a late K6, an early K7, sort of based 98 or early XP machine, and a lot of you guys run like dual Voodoo 2s and SLI, maybe a Voodoo 3, early GeForce cards, or you're running, very few of you out there who might be running like an early Radeon card or something like that in your retro system. This is designed to illustrate a window of performance where you're running the best single-core Athlon XP CPU. So here we've got Windows XP running with my Athlon XP 3200 Plus, matched against my 533 MHz Intel Celeron, which is a Pentium 2 based chip, in Windows 98. And here you can see the full window of just how much performance the Voodoo 3 card really has when you pair it with a much newer single-core, very fast CPU, compared to how it runs with a rather slow and sort of probably the slowest CPU you really want to pair with this video card. Any slower than that and you're really not doing yourself any justice by buying a Voodoo 3. So that's the window performance we've got, which is actually kind of a nice window performance, to be honest. Now the very final chart that I wanted to show you guys is the final nail in the coffin for why I decided not to stick with the TNT2. I did have a couple of people mention that there might have been a bit of CPU issues where the TNT2 card might rely a little bit more heavily on a faster CPU to actually be able to get its full potential. So I decided to chuck the TNT2 into my Athlon XP 3200 Plus system and run one of the most brutal benchmarks that I found across the board out of all the testing I did, the Massive one and the Crusher Quake 2 benchmarks, just because they utilized so much of the CPU's performance as well. Yeah, we can really see here the TNT2 just getting its ass kicked. This card, it is the M64 model, so it is not one of the highest end models. In fact, I'd say it's not even quite the most mid-range version of the TNT2. There's definitely a lot more performance if you happen to get a Ultra, TNT2 Ultra, maybe even a 32 meg version and an AGP version at that. You still might gain quite a lot more performance, but of course this is what I had to go with because I was limited to PCI. And I also wanted to limit myself to 16 meg of VRAM as well. Now these are some of the main games that I wanted to play on this system that are on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of hardware requirements. So this is a measure of how well the game is running given the CPU itself. So for instance, if you have a much faster CPU, the game might run at 150% speed because it's just rendering the game as fast as it can. And there's no time pacing basically. So you notice that pretty much all the games here on the list are running at their 100% ideal pacing. They're not running too fast, not running too slow, but there's two outliers at the bottom here. Wacky Wheels itself was running a little bit above pace, but it's definitely within margin of error where it doesn't affect gameplay at all. Still very playable experience and barely noticeable in games, just a few moments where it speeds up a little bit going around a few corners, but it definitely doesn't break the gameplay at all. Then we have Network Q Rally. Now this game is, I remember playing this game on my grandfather's PC, which was from memory, it was an Intel 586, which I can't remember the exact speed of. It was either 100 or 120, I can't remember, one of the two. And even then I remember that game playing really smoothly. I can't remember what resolution we used to run it at, but I switched it up here and run it at 640 by 480, and it still run a little bit faster than what it's supposed to run, but it was still a very playable experience, not game breaking at all. There's just a few moments where there's not a lot going on. If you have no AI or anything like that at all, the game runs a little bit faster than normal, but still very manageable, and the game runs perfectly fine. So that's it for all the benchmarks for this video, guys. I apologise, there's been a bit of a delay. This video, as I mentioned, was originally scheduled to come out last weekend, but a bit over a week ago now, and decided to go back to the drawing board and do a bit of testing to make sure I was providing you guys with the most accurate figures, given the recent results of Phil's video, which was very enlightening in terms of just how much drivers can impact early NVIDIA-based cards. So, it's been a lot of fun building this system. I must admit, I set out with a very particular, target of requirements for the brief for this build, and pretty much feel that I nailed every single one of them. The system is running perfectly with every single game that were at the low end to the high end. I have tried playing a few newer games, like games from year 2000, 2001. They don't quite run too well because you definitely need a CPU from that era, which is twice as fast to be able to really play them properly. But even going back and playing games like System Shock 2, Deus Ex, anything like that, this system just runs those games perfectly without any issues at all, especially with the Voodoo 3, as I mentioned. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this first retro build part series that I've done. This was definitely a bit of an experiment sort of style of doing these videos. I hope you guys have enjoyed them, but I have got a really unique build that I'm going to be doing sometime soon. Now you guys might have noticed that I haven't done much content based around my Pentium 4 based system in recent months. That's because it's kind of been a little bit stripped apart. I decided after I got the 7800 GS for that system, and we're pretty much sitting right smack bang in the middle of summer. Here in Australia we had a few really hot weeks in a row here, and it kind of made me think I really want to go back and build the full water cooling retro system that I had from 2016 with that same hardware and the 6800 Ultra. But because I'd originally stripped that system before I started doing my YouTube side of stuff, I never filmed any of it, and I want to go back and rebuild that system again with the full water cooling and the 6800 Ultra with the water blocks and everything on it, and do all of that. So I'm going to be doing my next retro build. We'll be redoing all the water cooling on my retro build. So that'll be kind of an interesting video for you guys if you guys aren't familiar with doing water cooling on hardware of this era as well, and some of the quirks of what early water cooling was like for systems of this era, when it definitely wasn't mainstream, nothing was unified, there wasn't unified sizes for everything. It's kind of a very interesting era for water cooling side of things. So stay tuned for that video. That'll be coming up in the next couple of months. I'm going to be a little bit busy with some other wedding stuff, so that video is going to take a little bit of a, or that project's going to take a little bit of a back step at the moment. But stay tuned on the channel, because coming up in about a week, I've got my next retro history video, which is going to be based around a slightly more modern NVIDIA card, but it's a very, very awesome card from NVIDIA's history, and a bit of an underdog that not a lot of people experienced the same experience with this card that I did. And it's going to have a very unique perspective to do with a lot of overclocking, and sort of it's going to cover a bit of a unique perspective. I'll just leave it at that. And I think you guys are going to enjoy the kind of angle and the fun that I had with filming this one. I kind of decided to go for a bit of a humor and a bit of something a little bit different in a way with filming this one. So hope you guys enjoy this video today, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.